Hello again, welcome back to Procurement and Supply Chain Live Singapore 2025. Remember, if you want to check out the rest of the agenda coming up in the show, just go onto that side panel on the side of your screen now. Along there you can put your questions as well to all of our guests. So let's move on to our next fireside chat. And I'm delighted to welcome Eirik Andersen, VP Chief Corporate Affairs Officer, Telenor Procurement Company. And we're going to be talking supply chain sustainability and Scope 3. Hi Eirik, how are you?
Good, thank you. And yourself?
Yes, very good, thank you. This show has absolutely flown by. We've covered a huge amount of ground. And one thing that's come up time and again is about sustainability, Scope 3, and how to integrate that into supply chains. And luckily, that's what we're talking to you about as well, so that works rather well. An awful lot to get through in sort of next 20 minutes or so, and if you do have any questions, just pop them in the chat on that side panel, as I said. So, Eirik, where I'd like to start, if I could, is how companies can accelerate making their supply chains more sustainable. We know there's plenty of work going on. I'm sure you've seen plenty of work yourself and been involved in it. But the key word for me is the acceleration. How can companies go about speeding up that effective progress?
So I think on that note, I think running a sustainability program in a company is not a sprint, it's a marathon, right? So I think, first of all, I think that building that dedicated strategy in this area is crucial in order to succeed. It's both around the alignment and the clarity and the consistency in running this type of program. So, once you're setting the clear frameworks and the clear goals on what you want to do, I think is around the strong support on executive management level in order to be able to drive this down throughout the organization. So that's, of course, a crucial ingredient to this. On top of that, I think you need to believe in this, right? So both management need to believe in this and driving that culture throughout the organization. So this is not something you do on the side. Sustainability is not something you do on the side. It needs to be a critical component and sort of interconnected and intertwined with the business objectives that you do have.
Now you mentioned there that the clear and measurable goals, because data is absolutely crucial in all of this. It is the fuel for the whole of the operation. For you, advice on making sure that data is clear and measurable and you can actually operate off it. What's your advice there when it comes to making sure you do have that data and it's reliable?
I mean, data in this aspect is a challenge to get access to reliable data. I mean, first of all, depending on which area you're in within the sustainability domain, whether it's health and safety, whether you're looking at human and labor rights, whether you're looking at climate and environment, or business practices and trade compliance, I think access to, you don't have a stock exchange for this data. So getting access to that data and the integrity of that data is critical. So I think the value and the importance of driving supplier relationship management and driving continuous engagement with the supply chain is critical, really, to get access to a feel for how the supply chain is working in this domain.
From your experience, though, where have you had the greatest success when it comes to building those relationships with suppliers to get the access to the best data and the most reliable data? Where have you had the greatest success there?
We are a procurement company for the Telenor Group, and I think in that respect we're using the procurement leverage we have into driving realization of our strategy, really. So when we have in our contracts clear requirements for reporting and for, if you look at take the climate area as an instance. Or as an example, I think what we're doing there is setting clear requirements for suppliers first to set science-based targets and submit their targets for the Science-Based Targets Initiative. So that's one place to get access or drive that independent verification of their climate targets, for instance. And then thereafter, we do consistent follow-up on that. I mean, Telenor Group has gone out public and saying that by end of 2025, we will have 66% of our global supplier spend with suppliers who've set science-based targets. So that's obviously something we are monitoring consistently throughout our value chain. And then we're building that data together with our global spend data to measure how we are performing as an organization, but also looking at the companies who have committed to setting targets and what their timelines are, and then driving that engagement with them to aid them towards the setting of science-based targets.
Eirik, I've said on a couple of occasions during the show today that it is easy to celebrate the successes. It's harder to have some of those more difficult conversations potentially with suppliers who aren't doing what they need to do or are maybe falling short. From your experience, how vital is it that you're prepared to have some of those difficult conversations with suppliers or other relationships to make sure you're getting the data or the performance you need?
Well, I mean, the way we look at this is again, it's important that this is not something you do on the side. So it's enshrined into our business operating model. And I think we look at sustainability and in particular climate in the eyes of a fair competition. So I think having these conversations with the suppliers is critical, and then allowing them to understand that if they want to be a business partner of ours, then I think we're expecting them to support the global or the climate and sustainability targets that we are having, because this is what our shareholders are measuring us on. So I think having those difficult conversations is really crucial. We are building our framework and executing our framework in the eyes of fair competition. So I think going out and saying publicly that we expect our suppliers and business partners to set science-based targets and not following that up in terms of where do you place your spend? You know, which suppliers do you enter into those contracts with? You would be acting very conflicting and very confusing to the supplier market if you, on the one hand, go out and say that this you need to comply with, but when it comes to entering into contract, then we purely go for the lowest price. And it sort of put those responsible suppliers in an unfair disadvantage, whereby they have invested in sustainability programs, in reliance of getting business and getting contracts from those responsible purchasers out there as Telenor Group. But then, if Telenor Group is not following up on that, we're sort of encouraging the irresponsible business supplier market out there. So I mean, it's critical to be able to have those difficult conversations, and we've had that on numerous occasions, just following up both in terms of non-compliance with our sustainability principles, but also in terms of showing the real value and showing how these suppliers are really being disadvantaged, or saying clear out that there's limited incentive for our management to place a contract with you because we have 3, 4, 5 other different suppliers in the same market who are supporting our business rationale, who are supporting us as a business partner. So it's much more effective to place our business with this supplier.
Because there is the influence, as you say, that the Telenor Group can show when it comes to your supplier base. When it comes to the amount of support you work and offer to suppliers, is that important to help bring them along with you on your journey?
No, I think especially, and it's good that you bring that up. So this is not only about setting requirements to to the supply chain, but I think we need to appreciate and to recognize that there is an awareness raising level or awareness raising need out there in the market. So we spend substantial amount of time doing webinars or seminars with a large mass of suppliers to educate them both on the process of setting science-based targets, why this is important and how they can go about doing this, because we're all about making an impact. So I think in the very larger scheme of things, we have as a mission, or we want to make the world a better place to live. It's a bit big words to use, but I think if you want to go on that journey, and if you want to take a responsibility for improving the world and making an impact in your prioritized or dedicated areas, then I think you need to take a responsibility in also educating the value chain in this domain. So I think I used to work with a government pension fund in Norway. That's a GIC similar corporation now. And the head of ownership strategies there, they could have taken the approach that they blacklisted companies and did not want to invest in companies that were engaged with child labor or other human rights faulty practices, to put it that way. But instead, the approach that they've taken is that they'd rather be invested in those companies and then utilize the power you have as a shareholder or investor or customer of that company to affect that company into driving responsible business practices instead. Because I think looking out investments from this from the supply chain or from suppliers in the market because they're not doing something or behaving in a way that you want them to, I think, does that really make them better? So we're all about, we want to increase the competition in the supplier market. At the same time, we want to drive responsible business in the market. And then what's our responsibility in making that happen? Is it only to place contract with those responsible suppliers? Or can we spend time also on training and educating the rest of the supplier market to ensure that their level of responsibility or level of awareness is increasing in these areas.
Are there any particular initiatives that you've followed up with your supplier base in this area that you found have been particularly effective?
No, I think so. Again, we're a global corporation, Telenor Group, and we're setting high standards across all the market that we're operating in. And I think what we see as a global function, as a global procurement function, is that you may be having human rights or poor labor standards in one of the markets with a supplier in one of the markets. That does not necessarily get escalated to the top level, either at the supplier or at our end. But I think having that possibility to bring responsible business from a top down, so from a principal perspective, into the supplier, into the supply chain there, and dig into that local market and say, hey, these practices we do not tolerate on a global level, right? So it may be that the poor labor standards is part of is in compliance with local regulations, for instance, in that particular market. However, that's not that's not supporting the standards that we want to implement in employee safety, for instance. So that in those cases, it may help to escalate those matters to the global level of the suppliers in order to together drive more responsible business down to the local level.
And that picks up perfectly where I wanted to take the conversation next. And that is about how do you go about forming a sustainable supply chain strategy on that global level when there are different standards around the world in different regions. A strategy that may work in North America or Europe may or may not work in Asia or in different particular regions. How do you go about making sure that strategy is maybe flexible while still growing standards?
No, I think that's a good question. So I think what you're really asking is for the global or multinational corporations out there, how do you define those common denominators across all the markets you're in? How do you define those key principles that your shareholders or you as a global corporation really believe in, or really have defined that this is where we want to impact on the world? This is where we believe it's key that we make an impact. We make that impact on the world or on the supply chain. And I think it's about finding. So I mean, most corporations out there will have their supply chain principles or their code of conduct. And I think the code of conduct or their business principles is really the crux of this. So staying true to those higher level principles and then driving them into the supply chain and into the local businesses is key. Then I think it's not so much about loosening up or applying different standards in one market compared to the other, but it's about the responsibility you can take as a global corporations in there. So for instance, Telenor, we have operations in we're in four markets in Asia, and then we're in northern part of Europe. And I think what we've done in Asia, if you take an example such as child labor, and abolishing that or working to abolish that. So what's the alternative that you drive there? And I mean, raising education for children in third world countries has been a foundation of what we've been doing. If you look at our operations in Bangladesh and in Myanmar, where we were earlier, and in Pakistan. So I mean, taking the responsibility in those markets and looking at, one thing is, you don't want child labor in those markets, but what's the alternative? So how can you on the one side abolish child labor or discourage it, and at the other side, how can you encourage or improve the standards in that market at the same time? So I think we as global corporations or multinational corporations, it's important that we look at, when we're having labor or we're having operations in one country, we're a guest in that country. And I think as part of that, as part of the responsible business we do in that country, it's important that we give back. And if we come from a set of certain standards in the market that we are established or are HQ'd, it's important to try to drive or increase those standards, or increase or drive implement those standards in those local markets to increase the way of life there, so to speak.
A couple of areas I still want to cover off before we look to wrap things up, because time is rapidly running away from us, is first of all is technology. Of course, it's going to be a game changer in certain areas to help you measure data and the accuracy of that data. Where do you feel the greatest benefit is from different technological solutions to improve the sustainability of supply chains?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure I have I'm not sure I have a good answer to that. So I think, I'm not sure I have a good answer to that. So I think reliance on data for sure, and then driving efficiencies, and then reducing manual labor. I think you can do certain parts with that, but I think technology as such, whether that improves the sustainability in countries or not, I'm not entirely sure. I think it's important that the companies out there really have a spine that is filled with key principles that are important values that we just seek to implement in that. And I think technology may be a way of improving or increasing the efficiency in the operations and safety, perhaps also. But I think you won't be able to go outside the standards and the principles that global corporations need to apply in these markets.
Well, for a man who wasn't sure if you'd have a good answer for it, I think that was a fantastic answer there, Eirik. And finally, the last question I wanted to go through is looking to the future, really. What do you see as the main trends for supply chain sustainability over the next few years? What would you consider those to be?
Now, this is a really good question. I think with the geopolitical tension that we see in the market now, I think it's going to be an exciting future, to put it that way. I think a number of sanctions, you see sanctions and trade wars, maybe increasing. I think one thing that I've been thinking, or we've been thinking a bit about, is now you see the US pulled out of the Paris Accord, and of course we don't see that as a positive sign. However, if you look at the supplier markets, today. And I think the corporations today are pretty much bigger than just one nation. So I think if you look at the change that corporations such as Apple and Microsoft and Google to the extent is driving, are they too big to only follow the regulations of the US? Or are they values and principles? Are they going beyond the politics of the US and the US presidency today, pulling out of the climate accord and saying that 1.5 degree target is not as important any longer? Will these corporations take a responsibility that is larger than that, and then implement their own policy? Because I think some of these global corporations are much bigger than just one nation, and I think that may impact on the 5-year term to come. I think you see in China also, Huawei have taken steps into part of their operations, at least has set climate targets with the SBTI, and then I think if you look at if you do a filtering of on the SBTI web pages, you'll see that I think there's about 600 Chinese companies who've submitted to the Science Based Targets Initiative, and I think that's a positive trend for the future.
So I think the speed of change, especially with the geopolitical lens, has been a key trend of the event today. Well, Eirik Andersen, thank you so much for joining us here at Procurement and Supply Chain Live Singapore. Really enjoyed our conversation.
My pleasure.